up for grabs, one can understand why. The event started with a 3-kilometre swim, then a 130-kilometre ride, and finished with a 30-kilometre run. Not as long as the Hawaiian Ironman, but still tough enough for even the experienced competitors. The favourite in the men's section was last year's winner, Mark Allen. In 1988, Allen finished in 6 hours, 6 minutes and 26 seconds. The 31-year-old has won the World Championship 5 times. Another American, Dave Scott, loomed as another threat. At 35, Scott is still hungry to push the limits of human endurance. Scott has won the Hawaiian event an incredible 6 times.
This particular distance weighs into my abilities a little bit better. I like a little longer cycling leg, and I like a longer run at the end. And the conditions here are going to be pretty humid, so I'm not a camel, but I seem to do pretty well in warm conditions.
32-year-old American Scott Tinley has competed in more triathlons than anyone in the world, winning over 11 major events, including the Hawaiian Ironman twice.
Well, I don't like to make any predictions, but I feel pretty strong. You know, this distance is good for me. If I can have a good swim and I can be out near the leaders, I think that I have as good a chance as anybody else to win the thing. It's just a matter of whether I can put it all together.
Australia's best hope was 32-year-old Victorian Greg Stewart. Stewart finished third in the 1987 Hawaiian event and was sidelined for 12 months because of injury.
This and Hawaii are my 2 main races for the year, so this is one I want to do well at, so hopefully things will come off.
Queensland youngster and local hero Miles Stewart loomed as an interesting threat despite being short of experience in the long events. While countryman Nick Croft was again expected to be up with the pace setters after finishing 11th last year. New Zealander Rick Wells, a former Commonwealth Games swimmer, also loomed as a strong contender. In 1987, Wells had won the World Sprint and Long Course Triathlon titles.
You've got to be really watching what you put into your body in the way of fluids and eating right, and you've just got to monitor your pace. You know, if you go out too hard, well, you're going to pay for it later on. But then again, if you go out too slow and give too much time away to the front runners, well, then you're going to be behind the 8 ball at the finish. So it's a really thinking and tactical race.
Another American, Mike Pigg, couldn't be discounted. The 26-year-old had won an incredible 15 events in 1988.
I'm still working on developing my skills to, stay with people like Dave Scott, Mark Allen, Scott Tinley. So I'm still in my development stage for that. Someday I'd like to be able to run that far and that fast, like, say, a Mark Allen. And so it's really good if I could win a race like this.
Compatriot Ray Browning, or Mr. Ultra to his friends, is a long course specialist. He has won the Japanese, Canadian and New Zealand Ironman events, as well as a 6th placing in Hawaii.
I would like to win this race, I really would. I've come a long way in a year. Didn't have a good race here last year, and that sort of has fueled some desire. But certainly you always want to win the race. I mean, it's always the ultimate goal. So that's what I'm shooting for.
Zimbabwe's Paula Newby-Fraser established herself as the leading lady in triathlons after finishing an amazing 11th overall in last year's Hawaiian event.
It's a very tough course, and that makes me even more determined to go at my own pace, because I think it's very tough. There are a lot of tough hills. It requires a lot of concentration mentally, so I think it's going to be necessary to pace yourself well through it.
Australia's long course champion Louise Bonham led the local charge, having won this year's Foster Ironman race, while Queensland's Liz Heppel reached the peak in the world of international cycling, finishing 3rd in the Tour de France. World renowned as a sprint specialist, Western Australia's Carol Pickard was expected to do well in her first long course event.
Be very public about my goals here. Yes, to be first Australian would be quite satisfying.
America's charge was led by Julie Wilson, who's been knocking on the door to stardom for the past 2 years. Wilson finished 4th last year. Compatriot Julie Moss also had the form on the board with 2 impressive wins in Europe last year. Mark Allen and Julie Moss are by far the world's most popular triathlon couple. Recently engaged, it was Julie who gave Mark the inspiration to take up the sport.
In 1982, I was sitting around the living room, turned on the TV, and there was the Ironman on television. And I had never really heard much about triathlons. I saw Julie. She fell down, went through the whole emotional crawl to the finish. And I have to admit, it really kind of choked me up, and it got me inspired to try the sport.
Allen is nicknamed the Grip, as in the grip of death. A 5-time world champion, Allen has an amazing ability to shut out his opponents and push his body to the limit.
Something changed when I got involved with triathlons. There was no pressure on me. When I started out, it was something I was doing as a recreation, something for fun. And I think because of that, I saw what you can do with yourself when you release that pressure and you just do the best you can do on any given day. And out of that, I've learned that not having pressure on myself, there's always some pre-race pressure, but just going the best that I can do allows me to focus better because I'm not worried about what I'm not doing, if that makes sense.
Sure. Mentally, he seems to be able to focus better than just about anybody in the sport, and that's his strength. I mean, he's definitely one focused man when the gun goes.
She goes through some pain barriers. How long does it take to recover after a big marathon such as this or a triathlon such as this?
Allen might have the higher profile, but Moss is also a triathlete of great note, having won major events last year in France and Sweden, as well as a 7th placing in last year's World Cup.
I'm not too concerned how Mark does. A lot of times I do get a little sidetracked into sort of making sure he's right up in front, then I relax and go on with my race, and that's just not the case here. I don't care how it turns out for Mark. Oh, I do a little. But I've really put a lot of effort into training for this particular race, and I mean, I really won't be happy without a top 3 finish here, so I'm getting on the line and saying it publicly, but that's what I've come for, is top 3, and I feel like I'm pretty ready to do it. You don't want to be marrying a bearded woman.
Allen is well known for his consistency and ability to peak for each event. There's also a humorous side to the defending champion, as some of the locals found out.
I was swimming down here and I felt something in front of me under the water, and I just heard the stingrays in here.
There are stingrays in here?
Yeah.
Shark Alley, they used to call it.
Come on. Doesn't matter, I won't be at the front.
I was just wondering if any little baby alligators washed down with all this water.
Crocodiles here, mate.
Oh, crocodiles, that's right.
I'm sure.
Seriously, though, Allen is worried about the opposition. Who wouldn't be, with the likes of Tinley, Pigg, Wells, Scott and Browning taking part?
The guy I'm going to keep my eye on the most in this race is Dave Scott. He's notorious for coming from behind. He doesn't have to be anywhere near you on the bike ride because he can run you down if you fall apart or slow down. He's right there. He's like a vulture waiting for you to die. Mike Pigg, obviously, because he's dominated the sport for the last 2 years. Scott Tinley can always pull one out of his hat. Glenn Cook from England, who maybe a lot of people haven't heard about, he's come over here prepared and ready to show what he's got.
Just over half an hour before the race start, and conditions are ideal for the 2nd World Cup. course this year is quite different from last year's. Although some warmed up against the current, the field was to head in the opposite direction, with the leaders expected to finish the 3-kilometre swim in just 20 minutes.
Most of the people are going to get out in 20 to 25 minutes. It's pretty much a biathlon in a sense, just a bike run. So I think his concern is that there's probably about 8 or 10 guys that are going to be in the front, and we know who those guys are.
What is it now? You've got 10 minutes to go. How are you feeling?
Oh, pretty nervous. Yeah, very nervous.
Psychologically and mentally, tough event?
Yeah, tough event, but I feel really great, so I think do my best.
Current looks pretty strong.
Yeah, isn't that great? I'm wrapped. Yeah, it should be really good.
The atmosphere before the race was rather relaxed. Even Paula Newby Fraser found time for a laugh. While young Victorian Digger Elric couldn't wait for the start.
Where all the beer stations.
One Australian was just happy to reach the nearest pub.
There's one out the back there near Sanctuary Cove, so I'll be looking forward to that. If I feel a bit tired, I might pull in for a bit of a charge up.
Do you always do that, do you?
No, only after the race. Got to have the old powers.
So what you're telling me the incentive now is to finish the event and so you can get totally blotto overnight.
That's a good idea, Andy, yeah.
Oh, I didn't think of that.
You won't use this on the telly.
One man who commands respect from the youngsters is Australia's 2-time world champion, 67-year-old Fred Knudsen.
Oh, I get a lot of comments about, what the hell are you doing at your age for? But my answer to that is, I enjoy doing it.
The swim leg started at the local high school TSS, with the field heading down Broadwater, past the Southport Bridge, and then home to Anzac Park, Southport. Any triathlon, it's the usual confusion and mayhem at the beginning of the swim leg.
We're going to get put down this side. See that? I knew that. Yeah. New Zealander Rick Wells, a former Commonwealth Games swimmer, had taken the early lead from countryman Brett Marshall and American Dave Scott. While the pace setters were involved in an interesting duel, it was also tough going for the rest of the competitors. Wells is considered to be the best swimmer in the field, and he was showing just why.
Because it's slightly downriver, I don't think I'll be getting the lead that I normally would like to have or will get. So I'll probably be taking the swim a little bit easy and trying to conserve a little bit of energy, because I might only make 40 seconds on the swim, and that'd be working hard, and so I'd sooner sort of not work as hard on the swim and sort of have that energy for the bike and the run leg.
Wells, Marshall and Scott maintained the grip up front, while the rest of the pack were lagging behind. Marshall had finished second in the swim leg last year, taking just over 40 minutes, but that was against the current. Scott is also an accomplished swimmer and was nationally ranked during his college years. Prior to the start, Scott had been critical of the swim leg.
If we're going to have, number one, a wetsuit swim, which gives everyone a false sense of buoyancy and seems to be more advantageous for the lesser talented swimmers, and then you're swimming with the tide, and even though you have a 3K swim, people were doing it in 20 minutes. That doesn't make sense. People are going to get out of the water, and they're going to be extremely fresh. They're going to be all clustered. It doesn't give the swimmer, the talented swimmer, a chance to break it away and to use his skill.
Halfway through the swim, the second pack was trying its best to catch the leaders, while Croft was expected to soon make a move. Wells had limited time to prepare for the World Cup, but it certainly wasn't showing. Amazingly, the lead swimmers were travelling at a speed of 9 kilometres per hour. Wells had swum an outstanding leg, but tragically he mistook the lower buoy for the top buoy and surrendered the lead. First out of the water was Marshall, followed by Croft, Scott and then Wells, with only 6 seconds separating the top four. First female out of the water was Australia's Carol Pickard. She was followed by another Aussie, Lisa Hardy, who recently won the National Nutrigrain Ironman Series. The transition area can be critical to the final outcome of the race, and obviously it's essential to save as much time as possible.
If those media guys can stand back and let the athletes do their job. There's Dave Scott out of the water. Number 3, Dave Scott, put the helmet on, Dave. Let the rules, everybody. Dave Scott, Carol Pickard in the shore. Just coming in. First ladies come in. Carol Pickard, one time to It's not glued on, but that's no problem. Get that applause going. We've got to people coming in off the beach. A few of our stragglers in the swim.
The cycle leg is 130 kilometres long, starting at the Southport pool. Along the way, the 350 competitors will ride along the Gold Coast coastline before moving inland for the testing hill sections, and then finally cycle back to the transition area. Mark Allen had finished 11th in the swim, but already had moved into 3rd spot early on in the cycle leg. As expected, Dave Scott led the field down the coast. After finishing 3rd in the swim, Paul and Yubi Fraser took just 5 kilometres to take the lead. Pickard held 2nd spot during the opening passages, while it didn't take too long for Julie Moss to slip into 3rd spot from Julie Wilson. Wells was riding consistently as he tried to make a move through the pack, as was local Miles Stewart. Out in front, Scott looked as comfortable as ever as he maintained his surge. While cycle specialist Mike Peake was doing his best to make up for his 24th placing in the swim. The biggest drama of the World Cup came just 47 minutes into the race. Tragedy struck Mark Allen. A flat tyre had put him off the road for over 3 minutes. Back in the transition, Allen had bumped into a photographer, which proved fatal. He was thrown off balance and threw away his pump. He'd lost valuable time finding a pump, and luckily race officials were nearby. Triathlons are not just about finishing first. One man making a name for himself in the sport is Australian Tony Unicum. Meet 25-year-old Sydney-sided Tony Unicum. A man devoted to killing the myth that you don't have to be lean and slender to succeed in triathlons.
3110, copy that accident.
Unicum works for the police force, and you wonder whether the job assists in training.
It's really funny actually, because chasing after fellows is not a great part of our work. However people may envisage a police force, it's more or less a great deal of paperwork and following things up, and you do get the odd exciting arrest, but I'm pretty much a dead loss over 100 metres. All the girls used to beat me in the sprint down at the police academy, and over 100 metres I'd probably run no faster than about 13 or 14 seconds.
Actually, Unicum can sometimes be the butt of office jokes.
Suppose there's one little incident where it wasn't so much, I suppose, humorous, but it was just that there was a few bosses downstairs in the station area, and he's come down and he's just got his scrunchies on because I think he was about to do some training or something. And we didn't realise that they all shave their legs, you know. And I suppose the police force is a pretty masculine type of job, and when he's walked past, just the expressions on all the other police's face was quite amusing to see his beautifully shaven, shining legs, but that's about it.
Well, they give me hoops about shaving my legs and things like sometimes, but other than that, most of the younger blokes are pretty good-natured. Some of the older fellows don't understand because the triathlons weren't around in their day, I suppose, but they find that they think I'm a bit silly, actually, I suppose, because it seems like too much hard work to them.
All jokes aside, his job gives him plenty of time to train. He's been competing for 5 years and is ranked in the Australian top 20. Not bad for someone who weighed over 16 stone in his teens.
I was quite overweight in my late teens and early 20s. I was up around the 16 stone mark, and I just became absolutely disgusted with my appearance one day and thought, you've got to do something about this. And I found out that I enjoyed going up to the gym, and it just became a logical progression from there, and it wasn't nearly as hard as I thought to compete in a triathlon.
Preparing for the World Cup hasn't been that bad. A week's accommodation in a modest Gold Coast hotel makes life easier.
Breakfast ready? Bring it out here. Yeah, oh, go and make your own.
Unicum has been preparing for this event all year. Just months ago, he qualified for the Hawaiian Ironman, and now his sole goal is to finish in the top 20 in the World Cup.
I always like to play the underdog, and last year I got no respect, and I imagine I won't get any again this year. But I like it that way, and I'm quite capable of doing okay, but I've just got to be more concerned with my own performance, because I don't think you can really control the performance of your other competitors. So being more concerned with what you do and less concerned with what everybody else does, and hopefully that'll work out well for me on the day. Because I'm well performed at the moment, and you know that I finish quite consistently in the top 10, it doesn't mean that one day when I finish, when I cease to finish highly, that I'll stop, because I enjoy going for a run. I enjoy riding my bike around. I think when I'm an old man, I'll have bikes in the garage instead of a nice car, and I can see myself doing it, you know, into middle age, because it's the kind of sport where there is competition amongst the age groups. There's a great camaraderie involved in the sport.
Meantime, Unicum and the rest of the field were trying their best to catch Scott, as the 35-year-old American maintained his hold. One hour in, and Scott Tinley on the far side was making his move, while Australian Greg Stewart was also doing the same at the 20-kilometre mark. Australia's long course champion Louise Bonham had finished 2.5 minutes behind Pickard in the swim and was paying the price. The first pack, led by Wells, was 2 minutes behind Scott. At the 30-kilometre mark, Wells had slipped to fourth, but moved into third, passing countryman Jackson Foster. The man making the biggest move was Pig. It didn't take him too long to jump into second position, but then again, that was expected.
It's just fun to, you know, pass someone and make them hurt really bad, and you're feeling pretty good, you know. I think the main thing I like about this course is just how tough it is. There's a rolling hill after rolling hill after rolling hill, and also how pretty it is. That adds to, it just makes it funner to race and someplace you enjoy to ride in. And you know, I love passing cyclists, but it's also a very challenging course, and that's what I like about racing.
Okay, keep out of the way.
Just 6 days before the World Cup, 2 punctures at the St Croix Triathlon in the Virgin Islands relegated Scott to 6th place. On the Gold Coast, Scott wasn't hindered by any problems. Meantime, in the women's section, an interesting duel had developed for third between close friends Wilson and Moss. It was the same story with the men. Wells held third spot, but only just.
The guy's trying to concentrate, Spot.
Young Australians Nick Croft and Spot Anderson had kept to their race plans and were only 2.5 minutes behind Scott. Not that it worried Anderson.
You got a cup of tea? You got a cup of tea? Morning tea, I can't do it too long. If you can. Is it a tough course?
Yeah, real tough. We're only starting it now. That other bit was just, now it's just to warm up. That's where it starts.
At the 60-kilometre mark, Croft and Anderson had joined the second pack. The move was on. This group was 2 minutes behind Scott. Despite the earlier setback, Mark Allen had come back into calculations and was quickly working his way through the second pack of cyclists. Pig had now moved to within 30 seconds of Scott. While the 6-time Ironman champion continued to push himself through the tough hills at Nerang.
Come on, man!
Paula Newby-Fraser had opened up a 4-minute lead from Pickard, who was pushing herself throughout. Wilson had moved into third place. While battles out in front were the focus of attention, it was just as tough, if not more difficult, for the rest of the field. At the 70-kilometre mark, Tinley led the second pack along Mount Nathan Road.
I'm trying to keep my head into the race as opposed to sort of letting it go and daydreaming a bit. Focus on how I'm feeling, what I need to do specifically, whether I need to relax or drink or eat or shift my gears in my bike and possibly where the competition is and how they might be feeling. But every once in a while, I'll sort of dream about laying on the beach or taking a couple of beers after the race. But for the most part, I think you really have to stay focused on the task at hand.
Pig's power during the cycle was paying dividends. He'd taken the lead for the first time. The Scott-Pig duel was easily one of the highlights of the World Cup. One of the most interesting competitors in the event was Brazilian champion Fernanda Keeler, who's developed a sex symbol image in the sport.
Isso é uma coisa que realmente eu nunca me ligo muito. Eu acho que eu me ligo muito mais com o lado atleta da coisa, do lado de você. Não me passa pela cabeça isso.
Keeler was in 8th place, but made up ground to finish 5th in the women's section. Tinley took 2nd last year and along the cycle found a good sparring partner in Aussie Greg Stewart, while Allen showed amazing resilience to make up for lost ground. Browning, on the other hand, was surprisingly well back in the field. Unicum and fellow Aussie Tim Bentley were well positioned behind the second pack. The pace of the race surprised Unicum.
I don't care, but there are a lot of guys have improved their riding, or a lot of guys are going to blow. Because we just went through 80k on the bike in 206, which is about 38 kilometres an hour over the hilliest part.
Unicum was right. The pace was overwhelming. Pig and Scott had opened up a 3-minute lead, only 2.5 hours into the event. Wells led the first pack, which now included Allen and Tinley. At the 95-kilometre mark, the duel between Pig and Scott was as intriguing as ever. Meantime, Paula Newby-Fraser had opened up a 2.5-minute advantage. The long course was a testing one for Pickard, but she remained up with the leaders, recording the 5th fastest time in the cycle. Pig's unique riding style has captured the imagination of the triathlon world.
Done.
102 kilometres in, Pig and Scott face the toughest hill on the course. Moss trailed Newby-Fraser by 6 minutes as she clung to 5th spot. lady making the biggest move was Heppel, who is now in second position. The Queenslander recorded the fastest time in the cycle. The second pack was just under 3 minutes behind Pig and Scott. Queensland teenager Miles Stewart led the local charge.
Come on, let's go!
The 17-year-old Queenslander looms as one of the dark horses in the event. In 35 triathlons around the country, he has finished first 19 times, an excellent record. His long-term ambition is to be the world's best.
Every month I just get that little bit closer, you know, like I was a long way back at the start of the year from the winners. Like the first race I did, I was coming back from injury. I was 6 minutes behind or something. And I came there being third, first, and then I came in front of the guys. Like Frankston, I pulled away, and I just seem to be getting better all the time. So hopefully it won't be that far away.
To be number one requires training, and plenty of it. Miles is a full-time triathlete. And better still, his father Cole doubles up as his coach.
Go, come on.
For someone so young, you wonder whether Miles is in danger of burnout.
27.
I'd have to ask you to explain burnout. I don't believe it. I believe burnout's a phase when a person's mentally just a little bit tired, and Miles rests a lot. Miles looks after himself. He's like a greyhound, and he just looks after himself like you couldn't imagine. Eats well, sleeps a lot, and does the right things, so he's got no hassles that way at all.
The relationship between father and son is a close one. Miles has been training hard in various sports for 8 years and has won 28 various Australian roller skating titles as well as 7 state cycling championships. It's not always easy being coached by your father. There has been some conflicts.
Oh, sometimes you get a bit there, but we're sort of 24 hours a day, so we're a pretty good pair. He's bigger than me, so he sort of tells me what to do.
Very, very easy to control. No hassles with him really in any way whatsoever, and he's really a friend, a really good friend. We travel around a fair bit, and probably people sort of wonder what's going on, but he and I are pretty close, and we do really have a very mutual understanding.
The only conflict Miles encountered in the lead-up to the event was from fellow countryman John Spot Anderson.
What are you doing, Grommy? You ready to pay your dues on Sunday?
Yeah.
Hey, look at the bike. Looks good, doesn't it?
Slack, mate.
Hey, you better start going home and get a few wrinkles. The old guys go good in this race. Old guys.
Amongst other things, Miles Stewart recently started a modelling career and is fast becoming a popular figure on the Gold Coast. It's all part of a plan to be a millionaire by the age of 21. This talented youngster has the ability to reach the high goals he has set, but only time will tell. The opportunity is there for Stewart, and no doubt he'll take it. Back on that hill at Maudsley Road, Unicum and Bentley still kept tabs on the leaders. Mike Pigg is a relative newcomer to triathlons and is regarded as the fastest cyclist in the sport. But on this day, Dave Scott had taken control. At the 105-kilometre mark, Heppel had surged into the lead from newbie Fraser. front, the man had dispelled any doubts about his fitness. Was doing exactly the same in the women's event. Before the race, many hadn't given her much chance of finishing in the top 10.
Here we go, Liz.
As expected, Scott led the field into the transition area.
It's Dave Scott. Dave Scott, ladies and gentlemen. From Davis, California.
He completed the 130-kilometre cycle in 3 hours, 23 minutes and 34 seconds.
Park that bike. Watch this. Get that helmet off, Dave. He'll wreck that bike.
Out of the way, guys. No, you get out of the way. Out of the way, out of the way.
Come on, cameraman, let's get into there.
Okay, guys, you can pull out. You can
30 seconds.
Scott was showing no signs of a knee injury, which limited his appearances last year.
Mark Allen comes in.
Allen showed amazing reserve to recover from his setback early in the cycle. He was just over 2 minutes behind Scott.
Scott had a slowish transition.
While Mike Pigg had surprisingly slipped to third place.
He goes into the change room.
Tinley held on to fourth. He was 2 minutes and 45 seconds behind Scott. While Rick Wells continued his good form, holding fifth.
Rick Wells has arrived. He's out on third.
Dutchman Henry Keynes had spent 3 months in Australia preparing, and it showed. He looked comfortable in sixth position.
We'll give it a whirl. Give it a whirl.
Good pace, we'll keep it up. Let's go. Rick Wells from New Zealand. Come on, mate. You can get him.
First Australian out of the transition area was Greg Stewart. He was in 8th place, 6 minutes off the lead. Stewart was 2 positions ahead of Nick Croft, another Australian with a bright future. In this year's National Ampole Series, Croft finished in the top 3 in Wollongong and Frankston.
How's it going, Crofty?
He stunned everyone last year by leading the World Cup for almost 4 hours. Just over 3 months ago, Croft moved to the Gold Coast to prepare for the event, and despite home ground advantage, he knows his limitations.
With the younger body, I could probably go faster than Dave Scott, maybe over a shorter race, but the longer one, it's much more of an advantage, I think, to be, to be older, because you've got the more endurance and you're stronger. He's stronger than I would be, and he's got a lot more experience. So that's what counts in a race of this long, the experience.
Croft started swimming at 7, took up running at 12, saw his first triathlon on TV 3 years later, and at 17 combined the 3 disciplines by taking up cycling. Still only 21, Croft has competed in 40 races, winning 15, and mixed with 7 days of training, the body has virtually no rest.
It's hard to say. For a start, it's a lot easier for me to get to the top in, say, triathlons than any one of the individual sports. But I think I just like to sweat. I think I enjoy pushing myself. I enjoy the feeling when I've accomplished something, and I basically just like to really like to test myself.
The former Australian aquathon champion finished 4th overall in the recent Ampol series, with the highlight a second placing in the longest race, a 2-kilometre swim, 80-kilometre ride, and 20-kilometre run. Lives alone and usually trains alone, preferring to concentrate on the goals ahead.
I'm very self-motivated. I don't really have an overall coach that needs to drive me. I have a swimming coach, but a lot of my training I do by myself because I like to sort of be out there alone and sort of test myself while pushing myself, so I enjoy it. I was probably a little bit more pride in racing because everyone sort of knows you. Over the last 6 months, they know how I've been progressing and know what I've been training for. So I'm going to have a lot of local support, and so it'll just make me dig down that little bit extra to try and finish up there.
Here he is, the boy from Sydney.
Into the run, Browning trailed Croft by a minute. Browning was troubled by a derailleur problem. Spot Anderson was a further minute back, but the pace was starting to tell.
Well, Spot Miles.
Miles Stewart trailed Anderson in 13th spot. Unicum was 28th and was looking forward to the challenge ahead.
Come on, let's cheer.
Yeah, well, I'll do what I can do. I can't control what they're going to do, but I'm not going to give up.
Heppel was rewarded for an outstanding cycle, recording the fastest time, giving her a 1 minute and 43 second lead over Moss.
Have you had sight of Liz Heppel in the last 10K?
No, not at all. She went blowing by us early. I hope all she can do is ride.
Pickard was the second Australian out of the transition area, while Bonham was in a great deal of bother. The last section in the World Cup, the run was 30 kilometres in length. The course isn't a testing one, it's mainly flat. The only worry was the oppressive heat. Scott looked comfortable in the humid conditions, and the 35-year-old was proving that age is no barrier.
There's a lot of young guys up there that are going to knock you off, and I think that there's a lot of myths around age. One of the biggest factors is motivation. If people have been doing a sport for a long period of time, they think, well, it's time to evolve into something else, and obviously that's going to happen. But I'm 35, and I'm the old guy in this sport, but yet I don't think my talents have dwindled.
Allen, meanwhile, was starting to cut down Scott's lead. Heppel had established a 1.5 minute advantage, but the run is not her strongest leg. Moss had the lead well within reach. She'd saved herself for the final run home. Just 10 seconds behind was Newbie Fraser. The Hawaiian Ironman champ had only arrived in Australia 2 days before the race. Finnish champion Pauli Kuri, another to spend several weeks preparing in Australia, held 6th, but finished 9th overall. The man who made the biggest move was Australian Greg Stewart.
Yeah, I would have liked to have finished the bike a bit stronger, but, you know, still a long way to go.
The heat and humidity was taking its toll. Not surprisingly, 8,000 litres of iced water was drunk during the race, as well as 2,000 litres of Coke.
It's too tough. I've been in Umea all week partying. Banana. Water. Water. Banana.
Scott was pushing himself to the limit. He knew Allen was making up ground. At the 11-kilometre mark at Sovereign Island, Scott's lead was down to just 20 seconds. A further 2 minutes back was Tinley. Fighting for fourth were Wells and Keynes. Greg Stewart, on the other hand, had jumped to 7th. Pigg was in 6th place, and the heat was starting to take effect. The same could be said for Anderson. Moss, on the other hand, wasn't worried about the heat, but only of Heppel.
Yes. You don't get there in the Tour de France for nothing. I want to know where she is now.
Heppel battled away out in front. The run for her was always going to be difficult. And Paula Newby-Fraser still held 3rd spot from Julie Wilson. Just before the halfway mark, Allen had taken the lead for the first time. The pressure on Scott was just too great. In 3rd place, Tinley was also feeling the strain. Wells had finally shaken off Keynes to move into 4th, and it was good news for Moss as well. She was only metres behind Heppel at the 10-kilometre mark. Moss did take the lead soon after, as Heppel stopped to tie up her shoelaces. Back in the field, there were some interesting comments being thrown around.
Fun day. I'm not.
G'day, all you blokes back at the camp place, Roma Street. See what you're missing out on today.
I'm not hard. The human body's got a heck of a lot of capability. We never really tried it out. Look at those Scott and Mark Allen, Paul Newby-Fraser and people. They're running times now in the island in which we would have been undreamed of.
Meantime, it took Newby-Fraser almost 23 kilometres to catch and overtake Heppel. Although in 2nd spot, Scott never let up and was pushing himself to the limit. The day belonged to 31-year-old Californian Mark Allen. He had the lead and wasn't going to surrender. Even Moss knew her fiancé had already won the race.
I'm glad it was done. It's a hard race.
Here's our winner, Mark Allen, shattering the course record. We're so out of whack with the time.
Allen completed a 30-kilometre run in 1 hour, 41 minutes and 26 seconds. He averaged an amazing speed of almost 18 kilometres per hour. Scott was far from disgraced. His fight from injury had been successful. He finished only 4 minutes and 5 seconds behind his arch-rival. And what was the reason for Allen's success?
He's younger than me, that's why. I had a handicap, had the plateau. Oh, Lord.
Tinley wasn't too far behind. His time, 5 hours, 33 minutes and 42 seconds. He was almost 7 minutes behind Allen. 4th home was New Zealander Rick Wells, a further 4 minutes and 5 seconds behind Tinley. The first Australian to cross the line was Greg Stewart. It was a great race for the 32-year-old Victorian who'd worked his way up through the field. Queenslander Nick Croft had taken 10th position, finishing 1 place better than last year. Fellow Queenslander Miles Stewart had achieved his goal, a top 20 placing. He was 35 minutes behind Allen. Unicum also had done well. Race time of 6 hours, 4 minutes and 41 seconds had given him 19th place. Meantime, Moss held on to win the women's race in a time of 6 hours, 19 minutes and 55 seconds. For so long, the bridesmaid, but today, the winner.
And Jeff Hall's come in.
Newby-Fraser finished 2nd, 5 minutes behind Moss. Heppel had run the race of her life. She'd hung on to 3rd from the fast-finishing Julie Wilson.
A magnificent job. First off the bike and 3rd home.
Sort of felt a bit bad at the start, but I was got into my about halfway through, and it felt good. The run was a killer. I didn't have the miles, but I can't believe it.